My name is Brooke Bennett. On the day I turned 33, my younger sister handed me a dress, and what happened next changed everything I thought I understood about my family. The dress was a violent, construction cone orange, the kind of color you put on a road to warn people away from danger. Around me, in a sunlit room filled with laughter and expensive juice on ice, 7 other women were sliding into matching lavender gowns. Soft, floor-length, perfectly fitted. They looked elegant. I was standing in a side hallway holding a plastic bag with the letters 2XL printed on it in thick black marker. I wear a small. I tried. I found a safety pin in my travel bag and attempted to pull the waist in, but the fabric was cheap and slippery, and the pin just bent. The dress bunched and billowed around me until I looked like something that had been inflated rather than worn. When I finally walked to my sister Sloane and asked what happened, she tilted her head, gave me the smile she uses for photographs, and told me it was the only dress left. My mother, when I found her in the hallway, told me not to ruin the day and that no one would be looking at me anyway. Later, the photographer moved me to the back of every group shot, then to the edge, and finally out of frame entirely. My mother whispered something to him to make sure of it. By the time the wedding cake was being cut, the truth had already begun to surface. Not because of anything I did, but because an elderly woman named Margaret Whitlock had been watching the entire day from 3 rows back, and she had seen everything. But to understand why any of this matters, you need to understand the family that handed me that dress and told me to be grateful. I am a structural engineer. I co-own a small inspection firm in Raleigh. We assess commercial buildings, offices, and retail spaces to determine whether they are sound or need repair. I built that business from nothing. I started at a community college, transferred to a state university, and worked 3 years as a waitress at a steakhouse to pay my tuition dollar by dollar, tip by tip. I graduated without debt and without anyone's help. I am proud of that, not because I want recognition for it, but because it was genuinely hard, and I did it anyway. My sister Sloane is 4 years younger than me. She dropped out of college and spent our parents' money while I was working double shifts. She has never held a steady job. She is beautiful and magnetic in the way that makes rooms rearrange themselves around her, and our family has always organized itself the same way. Everything moved towards Sloane. She was marrying a man named Daniel Whitlock, whose family owned wine estates in the Shenandoah Valley and had their name on buildings and endowments. Our mother, Diane, had been preparing for this wedding the way a general prepares for a campaign. Every flower, every seating arrangement, every impression carefully managed. She needed the Whitlocks to believe we were a family of substance. I was included in the wedding party only because leaving out the bride's only sister would have raised questions. I was there for appearances. The math had already been done before I arrived. 8 bridesmaids, 7 lavender dresses. The orange one was waiting in a storage closet. I drove 4 hours to be there. I ironed my best shirt for the rehearsal dinner the night before. I did not complain once, because that is what I do. I show up, and I try to make things work. It is my best quality, and the quality my family has always exploited most efficiently. At the rehearsal dinner, I sat next to my Aunt Renee, who kept telling me to smile more, and near a man who asked if I was a sister with the problems. I found out later that Sloane had described me that way to Daniel's family before I even arrived. She was already building the frame she needed, a version of me that was unstable, difficult, someone whose words could be safely dismissed. I left early and went back to my hotel, telling myself I just needed to get through one day. There's something I need to tell you about my grandmother, Ruth Draper, because it is the center of everything. Gran was a woman who raised 5 children in a small house and spent her whole life helping the people around her. She was the one who taught me what it meant to be decent. When she became too ill to care for herself, I was 28 and just started my engineering career. I rearranged my entire life to move in with her. For 3 years, I took her to appointments, gave her medication, bathed her, read to her, and sat with her through the nights when she couldn't remember where she was. I held her hand when she died. In those 3 years, Sloane visited twice, once for a holiday, and once to ask Gran for money to her car. I tell you this because at the rehearsal dinner, I overheard Sloane telling one of Daniel's aunts that she was the one who had cared for our grandmother at the end. She described the late nights, the doctor's appointments, the hand-holding. She was telling my story in her own voice, to people who had no reason to doubt her. I told myself I must have misheard. That is what being a responsible one does to you. It makes you extend so much grace to other people that you start doubting your own ears. The wedding morning confirmed everything I had tried not to believe. The bridal suite was warm and beautiful, with robes hanging on hooks, each one embroidered with a bridesmaid's name. My name was not on any of them. Sloane didn't look up from her phone. She just directed me down the hall to a supply closet where folding chairs were stacked against the wall. The orange dress was hanging on a hook inside a clear plastic bag. When I opened it, the smell of sealed packaging hit me before anything else. I went back and told Sloane it didn't fit. She gave me the smile. My Aunt Renee told me the day wasn't about me. I went back to the closet and tried the safety pins. I stood in front of a mirror in the storage room and understood clearly and without any remaining doubt that this was intentional. There had been 2 spare lavender dresses in the bridal suite. I had seen them with my own eyes. One was my size. The ceremony itself was held in a garden at 4 in the afternoon. I stood at the very end of the bridesmaid line, far enough to the side that a stone arch partially hid my shoulder from the guests. I walked down the path in the wrong shoes. No one had told me what color to wear, holding a bouquet of the wrong flowers, keeping one arm pressed against the safety pin at my waist so the dress wouldn't fall open. Margaret Whitlock sat in the 3rd row. She wasn't watching Sloane walk down the aisle. She was watching me. I noticed her noticing me, and I didn't know what to make of it. After the ceremony, during the photographs, the photographer worked his way through the group shots with methodical efficiency. Lavender dresses to the front. Then he looked at me. He actually said the words "a person in orange," and pointed me to the back, then the side, and eventually gestured for me to simply step out of the frame. I stood near a garden hedge while dozens of photographs were taken without me. My mother leaned in and said something quietly to the photographer to confirm the arrangement. I decided I would stay for the reception long enough to congratulate Daniel, and then I would leave. At the reception, I was seated at a table near the kitchen entrance. Daniel came over to speak to me. He was warm and genuine, but the things he said revealed exactly what Sloane had told him, that I was someone who had struggled after Grand's death, that I had difficulty getting my life together. He had no idea I ran a business. He thought he was being kind to a woman in a difficult chapter of her life. I sat with that and said nothing. Then I overheard Sloane again, this time at the edge of the dance floor. She was telling a woman from Daniel's family that she had put herself through engineering school, that she had worked nights as a waitress to pay tuition, that she had built her career from scratch. Every word was mine. She was wearing my history like a costume she had borrowed without asking and had no intention of returning. I went to her. I told her quietly that I had heard her. She looked at me the way you look at something inconvenient and said I was imagining things, that I was being dramatic, and that I should consider how I looked standing there in that enormous orange dress making accusations. She had given me that dress knowing exactly what she was doing. It made me easier to dismiss. My mother found me shortly after and told me plainly that the Whitlock family had certain expectations, so Sloane had needed to present a particular version of herself. She admitted that Sloane had told them she was an engineer. She told me I was known to the family as someone with problems, and that it was better for everyone if I stayed quiet. I went to get my jacket. I was finished, but Margaret Whitlock was sitting on a bench near the door, and she spoke to me before I could leave. She asked whether I was the one who had attended the State University for engineering. She mentioned the year I graduated. She asked how long I had cared for my grandmother, and she named the specific nursing staff who had been on call during Grand's final months, because she had telephoned them to ask. She looked at my orange dress and asked, with a stillness in her expression that left no room for misinterpretation, whether it had truly been the only one available. She knew. She had done her own research before the wedding even began. She told me to stay for the speeches. She said I would want to be present for what was coming. I found my mother's phone on a chair before the speeches started. There was a group message between my mother, my aunt, and Sloane. They had chosen the orange dress deliberately. They had coordinated with the photographer to remove me from the photos. They had discussed the lies Sloane was telling the Whitlocks and laughed about them in writing. My hand shook reading it, but I didn't make a scene. I sat down at my table near the kitchen, and I waited. The first speech was from Sloane's friend Tara, who told the room a beautiful story about a hard-working young woman who had put herself through school and devoted years to caring for a beloved grandmother. Everyone applauded. The room was warm and moved. Margaret Whitlock did not clap. She stood, and the room fell quiet the way rooms do when the most important person in them makes a deliberate movement. She did not go to the microphone. She walked the entire length of the reception hall and sat down at my table in the back corner. Every head in the room turned to follow her. My mother's face went still. Sloane's smile held for a moment and then didn't. Margaret took my hand and asked me to speak. I told the truth. I told it without raising my voice. I said I was the engineer. I said I had worked nights to pay for my education. And I said I was the one who had been with Grant at the end every day for 3 years. Daniel was close enough to hear all of it. Margaret told the room she had verified what I said independently through the university and through the medical staff who had known our family. She said the facts were not in dispute. Sloane said I was lying. The room did not believe her. You could feel it. The shift, the silence, the weight of people revising everything they thought they knew. Daniel stepped back from his new wife. Not dramatically, just a small, quiet movement, but it said everything. He had fallen in love with a woman whose identity had been, in significant part, assembled from pieces of mine. He stood there processing that, and his face showed how much it cost him. Sloane looked at me and said I had always needed to be better than her. She said she felt like she had nothing of her own, so she took the things that were mine. Then she walked out her own reception and the wedding. They had not yet signed the legal documents, effectively ended in that moment. My father said, quietly, that he should have spoken up a long time ago. It was the most honest thing he had said in years, but it was also years too late. Margaret told me, before I left, that she hoped I understood she now saw me clearly. I thanked her. I didn't need the Whitlock family's approval to feel like myself, but it mattered that someone had cared enough to look for the truth. I drove home that night and felt lighter than I had in years. I took off the orange dress and left it in a bag by the door. I didn't look at it again. A few weeks later, Sloane and my mother came to my office. They needed money. I told them no. I told them I wasn't carrying anger, but I was finished being the resource everyone drew from without acknowledgement. I closed that door without slamming it. I build things for a living. Structures meant to hold weight, to stand up under pressure, to be exactly what they appear to be. My family was built on something else entirely. But I am not my family's architecture. I am my own. If you have ever been placed in the back of the photograph, handed the wrong dress, or had your own story told back to you in someone else's voice, please know that the truth has a way of finding the surface. You don't always have to force it. Sometimes you just have to stay in the room long enough for it to arrive.